Welcome to Uncloseted Conversations. Even if you stumbled upon this channel by accident, you are welcome here. The stories here are from my heart, from my soul, from my pen to your ears. I hope that you will stay a little longer and open yourself to the magic of storytelling. Here I write fiction, and though not always aligning with reality, it still tugs at heartstrings. Stories are escapes and sometimes a balm to the soul. So, enjoy your time here, and if reality presses down too loud and too hard, come knock at the door, come in, take a seat, grab a coffee, and just exhale. These are veil-bound stories, and the space is free and non-judgmental. Sit back, earphones or pods in, and let's listen to another exquisite romance. The Anatomy of a Promise. To save her family, she had to lose her empire. To save her soul, she had to find a ghost. Chapter 1. Breaking a Promise. It is not that I say I do not trust you, it's just. Alexandria Voss hated how small her voice sounded. The words hung in the penthouse like something fragile that had already begun to crack. Storm Stone stood near the window, the skyline of the city glowing behind her. The lights of 1,000 buildings spilled across the glass, turning her reflection into a shadow stitched with gold. "It's just what, Alexandria?" Storm asked quietly. Alex felt the weight of the name. Storm only used her full name when something inside her had already begun to break. Storm stepped forward, gray eyes burning. "Is it because I don't fit into your neat little world?" she asked. "Or because you can't explain my presence in your life to your archival board and their little society dinners?" Her voice trembled slightly before she finished. "Tell me, Alexandria." Storm swallowed hard, forcing the tears back before they could betray her. She refused to cry here. Not in this museum of marble and glass. Not in front of the woman she had given 6 months of her life to. 6 months of late nights. Of quiet laughter. Of Rose's small hand wrapped around her finger while she explained constellations. 6 months believing that beneath Alexandria Voss's carefully constructed empire there might actually be a heart. Alex took a step forward. Her hand lifted instinctively, reaching for Storm. But Storm's eyes flashed. Alex froze. "Storm, please," Alex said softly. "Let me just explain." Storm let out a hollow laugh. "No, Alex." She shook her head slowly. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met? In that restaurant, when Rose collapsed." The mention of Rose struck Alex like a physical blow. Her mind flashed back instantly. The crowded dining room. Rose pale and trembling in her arms. Medics arriving too late. Panic swallowing the room. And then Storm. A stranger kneeling beside her daughter with steady hands and calm eyes. Storm continuing, voice rougher now. "You said you would never forget what I did for her," she whispered. "You said anyone who saved your daughter would always have a place in your life." Alex's throat tightened. "I remember," she said quietly. The words barely made it into the air. Storm nodded once. For a moment the anger in her eyes softened. Just enough to reveal the hurt underneath. "Apparently promises come with conditions in your world." Alex felt something inside her fracture. "That's not fair," she said weakly. Storm bent down and picked up the duffel bag at her feet. The bag looked painfully small in the vast marble room. Everything Storm owned in the world compressed into a single worn piece of canvas. Alex felt a wave of panic rise. "Storm, don't do this." Storm slung the bag over her shoulder. Her gaze lingered on Alex for a long moment. Once, those gray eyes had looked at her like she was more than a billionaire CEO. Like she was simply a woman. Now they looked at her like she was a stranger. "I didn't do this, Alex," Storm said quietly. "You did." The silence that followed felt endless. Somewhere in the city below, a siren wailed. Storm turned toward the door. Alex felt the room tilt. "Storm, please." Storm paused with her hand on the handle. For one fragile second Alex thought she might turn around. Instead, Storm spoke without looking back. "Take care of Rose," she said softly. Then she opened the door and walked out. The door clicked shut with a sound that seemed far too small for the devastation it left behind. Alexandria Voss stood frozen in the center of the penthouse. For the first time in years, the city lights outside felt cold. Chapter 2. The Geometry of Loss. The sound of the door closing was a clinical percussion. It wasn't a slam. Stormstone didn't do anything with wasted energy. It was a soft, decisive click that signaled the end of a 6-month resuscitation of Alexandria's soul. Alexandria Voss did not move. She stood in the center of her glass-walled cathedral, the penthouse that overlooked a city she supposedly owned, and felt the oxygen leave the room. Her knees didn't just bend, they failed. When she hit the floor, the Calacatta marble, chilled to a precise 68 degrees by the smart home system, bit into her skin through her silk slacks. She pressed her palms flat against the stone, searching for a vibration, a footstep, anything. But there was only the hum of the server racks in the hallway and the distant, rhythmic ticking of a 5-figure wall clock. "I am a billionaire," Alex thought, the words tasting like ash. "I own a Ford 500 company. I can buy a fleet of planes. I can influence interest rates." She looked at her hands. They were shaking. All that capital, and she couldn't buy back the gray-eyed woman with the scarred knuckles who had just walked out with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. "Storm," she whispered. The name felt like a prayer in a language she had forgotten how to speak. She remembered the second promise. It had been 3 months ago, on a night when the wind was howling against the glass, threatening to shatter their sanctuary. They had been lying on this very floor, a bottle of cheap wine, Storm's choice, between them. "I've spent my life being a ghost," Alex, Storm had said, her voice raspy and low. "People look through me. They see the homeless woman or the disgraced doctor. They don't see me." Alex had rolled onto her side, tucking a stray, wavy curl behind Storm's ear. "I see you. I promise, Storm, as long as you are with me, you will never be invisible again. I will tell the world who saved my daughter. I will give you your name back." But today, when the board of directors had sat in that mahogany-lined room and demanded to know why the CEO was cohabitating with a drifter under investigation for fraud, Alex had felt the cold hand of her legacy tighten around her throat. She had looked at the men in the suits, the societal snobs Storm hated, and she had stayed silent. She had offered to handle the situation quietly. She hadn't defended the woman who had spent every night for 6 months monitoring Rose's blood oxygen levels. She had protected the stock price. Alex pressed her forehead against the marble, the coldness finally numbing the ache. She had kept the company, and in doing so, she had become exactly what Storm feared, a stone facade with nothing but silence inside. Alex pushed herself slowly to her feet. Her legs trembled slightly as she steadied herself against the cool marble island in the kitchen. She could still feel the ghost of Storm's presence everywhere. The mug Storm always used sat beside the sink. Plain ceramic. Storm once said expensive coffee tasted better in cheap mugs. Alex picked it up. For a moment she simply stared at it. Then she set it down carefully, like it might break. The silence pressed closer. She walked through the penthouse slowly, her footsteps echoing across the marble floors. Every room held evidence of Storm. The blanket draped over the couch where Storm would sit with Rose during movie nights. A small stack of children's books near the reading chair. A half-finished puzzle on the low table. Storm had brought pieces of a real life into this carefully curated world of glass and steel. Outside the windows, the city glittered with wealth and power. But Alexandria Voss had begun to understand something brutal about the mathematics of love. Money multiplied comfort. Power multiplied influence. But loss had its own geometry. And when the right person left your life, the entire equation collapsed. Chapter 3. The Exile of Stormstone. The elevator ride down lasted 40 seconds. Storm knew because she counted every one of them. 40 seconds for a life to collapse. The mirrored walls reflected her from every angle. A tired woman in a worn jacket, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Someone who looked like she belonged nowhere near the penthouse floors of Voss Tower. For 6 months, the elevator had carried her upward into a world of glass and marble. Tonight it delivered her back to gravity. The doors slid open into the marble lobby. Security barely glanced at her as she crossed the polished floor. A few months ago, the guards had started greeting her by name. One of them once asked how the little astronaut was doing. Storm pushed through the revolving doors before the memory could settle. Cold air rushed over her face. The city greeted her like it always had. Loud, restless, indifferent. Traffic roared past the tower. Neon signs flickered above storefronts. Somewhere down the block a street musician was playing a tired saxophone that echoed through the night. Storm adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and started walking. Her boots struck the pavement in slow, steady rhythm. Each step carried her farther from the life she had accidentally stepped into, and farther from Rose. Storm's throat tightened. She tried to push the thought away, but it came anyway. Rose sitting cross-legged on the bed, fur line taped carefully to her small arm. Her big eyes wide with curiosity. Stormy, she had whispered conspiratorially one evening, is the 4-juice boring medicine? Storm had crouched beside the bed, examining the clear fluid bag with exaggerated seriousness. Boring, Storm had said. Rose Voss, that is rocket fuel. Rose's eyes had lit up instantly. Rocket fuel. Absolutely, Storm had nodded. But it only works if the astronaut stays very still during takeoff. Rose had straightened immediately, gripping the blanket like a pilot preparing for launch. Storm had tapped the 4-pole gently. This is mission control, she had explained. And once the rocket fuel reaches maximum power. Storm leaned closer and whispered dramatically. We leave Earth. Rose gasped. Storm dimmed the lights and began narrating. They flew past the moon first. Then Mars. Rose insisted they visit Saturn because the rings look like hula hoops. Storm described the stars in patient detail. The Orion Nebula. The Pleiades Cluster. The slow-burning blue giants that lived millions of years longer than the sun. By the time they returned to Earth, Rose had fallen asleep. Storm had stayed beside the bed long after, just watching the small rise and fall of her breathing. The memory struck Storm now like a wave. She stopped walking. A taxi sped past, splashing dirty water onto the curb. Storm stared at the streetlights blurring in front of her. Stormy. Rose had said the name with such effortless affection. Storm swallowed hard and forced her legs to move again. The subway entrance appeared ahead like the mouth of a tunnel. Familiar. Predictable. Safe in the way difficult lives often become safe through repetition. She descended the concrete steps. The warm underground air smelled faintly of metal, dust, and electricity. A train screamed somewhere deep in the tunnels. Storm moved toward the platform. People filled the station. Office workers heading home. Teenagers laughing too loudly. A tired mother dragging a stroller. None of them looked at her twice. To them, she was just another stranger in a city full of them. Storm sat on a cold metal bench. The duffel bag rested at her feet. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. For the first time since leaving the penthouse, she allowed herself to think about Alex. Alexandria Voss. Brilliant. Controlled. Terrified of losing control. Storm understood exactly what had happened upstairs. The board had spoken. And Alex had listened. Storm rubbed her hands together slowly. The anger she expected never came. Only a quiet exhaustion. The train thundered into the station. Wind whipped across the platform. Storm stood as the doors opened. Just before stepping inside, one thought slipped through her defenses. Rose would ask about her tomorrow. Storm closed her eyes briefly. "Good night, astronaut," she whispered under her breath. Then she stepped onto the train. and disappeared into the underground river of the city. Chapter 4. The Clinical Void. By morning, the penthouse looked like a hospital that had forgotten how to care. Medical equipment lined the living room walls where art once hung. A portable monitor blinked quietly beside the couch. The long dining table had disappeared beneath tablets, diagnostic reports, and glass carafes of untouched coffee. The penthouse was no longer a home. It was a high-end laboratory, and the silence was suffocating. 3 days had passed since the door clicked shut. In that time, Alexandria had brought in a specialized pediatric team from Switzerland, men and women who cost $5,000 an hour and wore white coats so crisp they looked like they were carved from paper. They stood around Rose's bed with tablets and glowing monitors, speaking in the hushed, detached tones of people who viewed a child as a series of data points. "The hematocrit levels are fluctuating, Ms. Voss," Dr. Eris said, adjusting his glasses. "We are sticking to the standard protocol for rare blood dyscrasia. We'll increase the dosage of the suppressants by 10%. Alex stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest. "Storm didn't use the standard protocol," she said, her voice sounding thin and alien to her own ears. "She said Rose's body overreacts to suppressants. She titrated the dosage based on the color of Rose's fingernail beds and the way she breathed in her sleep." Dr. Eris offered a patronizing smile, the kind of smile Alex usually reserved for competitors she was about to crush. "Ms. Voss, I understand you had a domestic assistant helping with care, but we are using evidence-based medicine. Fingernail beds are not a clinical metric." Alex looked past him to Rose. Her daughter looked small, swallowed by the Egyptian cotton sheets. There were dark circles under the girl's eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. "I want to go to the park, Mommy," Rose whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "Stormy said the trees in the gardens are blooming. She said the scent of the echinacea helps the headaches go away." "The echinacea is a pollen irritant, Rose," Dr. Eris interrupted gently. "We need to keep the air filtered and recycled." Alex felt a surge of cold, sharp fury. She realized then that these doctors were treating the disease, but Storm had been treating the child. Storm had understood the language of Rose's pain. She had turned the grueling treatments into a game of star mapping, using the 4 drips as fuel lines for the spaceship. Now the spaceship was just a hospital bed in a glass cage. Alex walked to her office and sat in the dark. She opened her laptop, the glow of the Voss Capital logo mocking her. She had protected the company. She had kept the board happy. And in return, she was sitting in a $10 million penthouse watching her daughter fade away because she had exiled the only person who knew how to save her. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small, crumpled receipt Storm had dropped weeks ago. It was for a bag of oranges from a street vendor. Alex pressed her nose to the paper, desperate for a hint of peppermint and rain. There was nothing, just the scent of ink and old paper. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. She stood and walked down the hallway to Rose's room. Rose's door was half open. Soft light spilled across the floor. She looked small in the massive bed. Too small. Alex sat gently beside her. "Hey, Star Traveler," Alex said softly. Rose gave a weak smile. Storm had started that nickname. Alex had adopted it because it made Rose happy. Rose looked toward the 4 bag hanging from the metal pole. The clear liquid dripped steadily. "Stormy said that's rocket fuel," she murmured. Alex felt something twist painfully in her chest. "She did," Alex said quietly. Rose watched the slow drip of fluid. "Are we going to space tonight?" The question landed gently, but the absence behind it felt enormous. Alex brushed a strand of hair from Rose's forehead. "Not tonight, sweetheart." Rose nodded slowly. Her eyes drifted toward the doorway where the doctors' voices echoed faintly from the living room. "They talk a lot," Rose said. Alex almost smiled. "Yes," she said. "They do." Rose studied her mother carefully. Stormy doesn't talk like that. No. Storm talked to children like they were explorers. Like their bodies were puzzles that could be solved with patience instead of fear. Alex squeezed Rose's hand. Stormy understands things differently, Alex said. Rose looked back at the four-pole. If the rocket fuel runs out, she asked softly, will she come back? Alex closed her eyes for a brief moment. Because the question carried more truth than her daughter could possibly understand. The doctors in the other room had knowledge, degrees, awards. But Stormstone had something rarer. She had intuition. And intuition could not be summoned with money. Alex opened her eyes and forced a smile. We're going to take very good care of you, she said. Rose nodded. But she whispered something so softly Alex almost missed it. I miss Stormy. Alex stood and walked back toward the living room. The doctors were still discussing data. Charts. Numbers. Probability curves. Alex watched them quietly. And for the first time since building her empire, Alexandria Voss began to suspect something terrifying. All the wealth in the world could build empires. It could move markets. It could bend governments. But it could not buy the one person who understood how to save her daughter. And somewhere beneath the weight of that realization, a terrible equation began forming in her mind. If Rose grew worse, she would have to find Storm, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. The Frame-Up Flashback. St. Catherine's Children's Hospital never slept. Even at 2 a.m, the halls glowed with soft fluorescent light. Machines hummed behind half-closed doors. Nurses moved quietly between rooms like careful ghosts. Stormstone stood at the nurse's station, reviewing a chart. The child in room 312 had been admitted with what the emergency department labeled a viral infection. Fever, headaches, nausea. But Storm's eyes lingered on the blood panel. Something about it felt wrong. Storm leaned back in the chair and stared at the numbers again. She had learned early in her career that medicine was rarely about memorizing facts. It was about pattern recognition, listening to the quiet language of the body. And sometimes the body whispered instead of shouting. Still here, Storm. The voice came from behind her. Storm turned to see Lena Morales, one of the night nurses, balancing 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. Storm smiled faintly. You're the one who bribed me with caffeine, Storm said. Lena handed her a cup. You've been staring at that chart like it owes you money. Storm tapped the page thoughtfully. Maybe it does. Lena leaned over the desk. Kid's just sick. Storm shook her head slowly. No, she said. Something else is hiding under it. Lena studied her. You always say that right before something weird shows up. Storm shrugged. Bodies tell stories. She tapped the blood report again. You just have to learn the language. Lena grinned. That's why parents love you. Storm made a face. They love that I don't talk like a textbook. Exactly. Lena nudged her shoulder. You explain 4 fluids like they're rocket fuel. Storm laughed quietly. Kids deserve better metaphors than saline solution. Lena started to say something else when a voice cut through the hallway behind them. Dr. Stone. Storm turned. Marcus Hale stood near the administrative offices. Chief Financial Officer. Tailored suit. Perfect tie. A man who looked like he belonged in a bank, not a children's hospital. Storm stood slowly. Mr. Hale. He smiled politely. Do you have a moment? Storm followed him into a small conference room near the administrative wing. The moment the door closed, Marcus' smile faded. I understand you requested access to several departmental budget files, he said. Storm folded her arms. I did. And may I ask why a pediatrician is reviewing hospital financial records? Storm slid a folder across the table. Marcus opened it. Inside were printed expense reports. Numbers highlighted in red. Because $2 million is missing, Storm said calmly. Marcus' expression did not change. Storm continued. That money was allocated for pediatric research and treatment programs. She pointed to one entry. but somehow it was redirected into a private investment account. Marcus closed the folder slowly. "You're very thorough," he said. Storm watched him carefully. "I'm a doctor," she said. "I notice things that don't fit." Marcus leaned back in his chair. For a moment he said nothing. Then he smiled again. This smile was colder. "You've made a very serious accusation, Dr. Stone." "I've made an observation," Storm replied evenly. Marcus steepled his fingers. "You spend most of your time with patients." "Yes." "You're not particularly involved in hospital politics." Storm frowned slightly. "No." Marcus nodded as if confirming something. "That's what I thought." Storm felt the first flicker of unease. "Why does that matter?" Marcus stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the city lights glowed beyond the hospital walls. "Because," he said quietly, "politics can be complicated." Storm's instincts sharpened. Complicated doesn't mean invisible. Marcus turned back toward her. "And sometimes," he said calmly, "people see patterns where none exist." Storm met his gaze. "The money is missing." Marcus's smile returned. "We'll look into it." Storm stood. "I already did." For a moment the room went completely still. Marcus studied her. Then he sighed softly as if disappointed. "That's unfortunate." Storm frowned. "Unfortunate for who?" Marcus picked up the folder and placed it neatly on the table. "For you." Storm didn't understand the full meaning of the words until the next morning, when 2 hospital administrators and a security officer were waiting outside her office. Accusations filled the air like smoke. Misappropriation of funds. Unauthorized financial access. Suspicious account activity. Storm listened quietly as they spoke. Each charge sounded carefully rehearsed. Each document carried her name, her credentials, her access codes. She looked down at the printed evidence. Every number had been rewritten. Every transaction redirected. Marcus stood behind the administrators, watching. Storm finally looked at him. Understanding settled slowly over her. Not anger. Not panic. Just a deep, quiet realization. "You needed a scapegoat," she said. Marcus didn't reply. Storm closed the folder. The room felt strangely calm. Because somewhere down the hall, a child was laughing. A nurse was singing softly to a patient. Life continued. Storm stood. "I have a patient in recovery," she said quietly. One of the administrators blinked. "Dr. Stone, you've been suspended pending investigation." Storm nodded once. She removed her hospital badge, placed it carefully on the desk. Then she walked toward the door. "Storm." Marcus' voice stopped her. She looked back. "Most people would fight this," he said. Storm shrugged slightly. "I'm a pediatrician." Marcus frowned. "And that means?" Storm opened the door. "It means sick children need doctors more than I need a reputation." Then she walked out, leaving the room, leaving the hospital, leaving the life she had built behind her. Chapter 6. The Ghost in the Boardroom. The boardroom of Voss Capital was a masterpiece of intimidation. High above the city, the air was filtered to a crisp perfection, and the silence was guarded by soundproof glass and the heavy weight of legacy. Alexandria sat at the head of the table, her hands folded over a leather-bound folder. Around her, the board members, the men who had successfully pressured her into exiling Storm, were celebrating. The quarterly projections were up. The unvetted variable had been removed. "The market has responded beautifully to the news of the Swiss medical partnership, Alexandria," Sterling said, his voice smooth as aged scotch. "Stability is the currency of the F500. You made the right call. The girl is in professional hands now, and the brand is secure." Alex looked at the digital ticker on the wall. It was green. Millions of dollars were being created every second. And yet, she felt a hollow, cold ache in her chest that no amount of capital could fill. "Stability," Alex repeated, the word tasting like copper. She looked at Arthur Sterling. He was leaning back, his eyes narrow and satisfied. He reminded her of the men Storm had described, the ones who had forged her signature and buried her career. To them, Rose was a variable and Storm was a stain. They didn't see the woman who had stayed awake for 48 hours straight during Rose's last crisis, humming old folk songs to keep the girl's heart rate steady. Rose isn't getting better, Alex said, her voice cutting through the self-congratulatory chatter. The room went still. The Swiss team is the best in the world, another member countered. It's a transition period. The optics. I don't care about the optics. Alex slammed her hand onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. My daughter is asking for a woman who saved her life with an astronaut metaphor, while your professional team is treating her like a research project. Alexandria, control your emotions, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a warning register. You are the CEO of Voss Capital. Don't let a temporary infatuation cloud your judgment of what this company requires. Alex looked around the table. She saw the vultures. They didn't care about Rose. They cared about the seat Alex occupied. They had used Storm's past as a weapon to control her. And the board speaking now as if a human being were simply an inconvenient variable. You referred to her as help in the last meeting, Alex said suddenly. Martin shifted slightly. That may have been an unfortunate phrasing. Alex's voice remained calm. You said she was a distraction. No one spoke. The silence stretched. Alex looked slowly around the table. For years she had trusted these people. Built an empire with them. Listened to their advice. Their strategy. Their caution. Now she saw something she had never noticed before. They were afraid of anything they could not quantify. Stormstone could not be quantified. She had no titles anymore. No wealth. No influence. Only intuition. And a strange, stubborn devotion to saving children. Which made her dangerous to a system that measured value in numbers. Martin cleared his throat again. Alexandria, you made the correct decision. Alex looked at him. What decision was that? Distancing yourself. The words landed softly. Like a verdict. Alex felt something shift inside her chest. A quiet fracture spreading beneath the armor she had worn her entire life. Because for the first time, Alexandria Voss saw the truth with perfect clarity. She stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. She realized then that she hadn't just betrayed Storm, she had betrayed herself. She had let these men define what was valuable. This meeting is over, she said, her voice shaking with a cold, focused rage. And, for the record, Arthur, it wasn't an infatuation. It was the only real thing in this room. She walked out, leaving the F500 world behind. For the first time in years, she didn't check the stock price. She went straight to the garage, her mind racing. She had to find the peppermint scent. She had to find the rain. Ghosts did not always haunt houses. Sometimes they haunted boardrooms. Chapter 7. The Night of the Stars. For months ago, the penthouse had felt like a different world. It was 2 a.m. The city lights below were a blurred mosaic of amber and blue. Rose had just come through a difficult infusion, and the exhaustion in the room was a physical weight. Storm was sitting on the floor of Rose's bedroom, her back against the bed frame. She wasn't wearing the denim jacket. She was in one of Alex's oversized cashmere sweaters, the sleeves pushed up to reveal her forearms. She was holding a small flashlight, pointing it at the ceiling where she had taped hundreds of glow-in-the-dark stars. You see that one, Rose? Storm whispered. That's the Southern Cross. Sailors used it to find their way home when they were lost at sea. Rose leaned her head against Storm's shoulder, her breathing rhythmic and calm. Were you lost at sea, Stormy? Storm's hand flickered for a second. In a way, little bird. The world got very dark for a while. I forgot where home was. Alex stood in the doorway, hidden by the shadows. She watched as Storm turned the flashlight toward her own palm, the light illuminating the scars on her knuckles. But then I found a star, Storm continued, her voice dropping to a low, Melodic hum. A very bright, very stubborn star that refused to let me stay in the dark. Rose fell asleep shortly after, and Storm stayed there, just watching her breathe. When she finally stood up and walked toward the door, she nearly ran into Alex. The silence between them wasn't the cold silence of the boardroom. It was the language of silence they had been building for months, a heavy, charged atmosphere of things unsaid. "You're amazing with her," Alex whispered. Storm looked at her, her gray eyes weary but soft. "She's easy to love, Alex. She doesn't see the disgrace, doctor. She just sees me." Alex reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the hem of the cashmere sweater. "I see you too, Storm. I swear I do." Storm didn't pull away. She stepped closer, the scent of peppermint and rain suddenly overwhelming. "It's easy to see someone in the dark, Alex. It's when the lights come on, when the world is watching, that people start to go blind." "I won't," Alex promised. She leaned in, her forehead resting against Storm's. "I'll be your lighthouse. I'll bring you back into the light." That night, they had stayed in the kitchen until dawn, talking not about medicine or finance, but about the lives they had lived before the world broke them. It was the night the love remade truly began, a reconstruction of two souls who had both, in their own ways, been living in exile. Alex had meant the promise then. She had felt it in the marrow of her bones. But as she stood in the present-day elevator, she realized she had been the one who turned the lights off. Chapter 8. The Search. The city had a rhythm, a pulse, and tonight it throbbed just for Alexandria Voss. Her penthouse balcony overlooked a glittering grid of streets, a million lives intersecting below. And yet, she could not see her Storm. Alex's fingers tapped across her tablet, swiping through satellite overlays, surveillance feeds, financial activity logs. Algorithms churned. Models ran. Predictions formed and collapsed like fragile towers. None of it mattered. Stormstone did not have a credit card. No bank account. No registered phone number. No social media footprint. The perfect traceable mind could not trace the untraceable. Alex's jaw clenched. She had built empires. She had moved markets with a thought. Yet here she was, helpless, searching for a woman with nothing but a duffel bag and a memory of rocket fuel. A soft ping broke her concentration. Rose's bedroom monitor. The little girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring a single word. "Stormy." Alex froze. Her chest tightened. That small voice, half-formed and innocent, carried more weight than the entire boardroom. "Stormstone. Wherever you are." She threw on her coat and informed the nanny, then she left the penthouse. The cold night air hit her face like a slap. The streets smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and exhaust. Neon reflected off puddles, fractured into 1,000 tiny, meaningless lights. Alex's SUV slid through the city, weaving past night markets, shuttered storefronts, and homeless families tucked under threadbare blankets. Her mind calculated probabilities, ran geolocation models, cross-referenced past patterns. Then she stopped. She took out her tablet and entered the maze. She hacked her way through municipal feeds, private sensors, and traffic data. She triangulated possible subway exits. She cross-referenced food trucks and public parks she knew Storm favored in the past. Hours passed. The city remained indifferent. And somewhere, Storm was moving through it, boots tapping on wet concrete, duffel bag swaying, memories of Rose tucked inside her chest like a compass. Alex paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. A man below stared into his phone. A woman with a stroller passed, oblivious to the billionaire scanning the night like a hawk. She could have screamed. "Storm," she wanted to shout. But even her voice would have been swallowed by the city. Finally, near the edge of the Riverwalk, her system pinged. A pattern. A fleeting signal. A feed from a city camera, someone carrying a duffel bag, moving quickly through the rain. Alex's breath caught. She raced after it, ignoring protocols, ignoring security, ignoring the board's carefully curated rules of behavior. Storm was in the city's veins, a ghost in motion. Alex clenched the wheel. She did not know how long it would take. She did not know if she would find her before the dawn. All she knew was this: Storm Stone saved Rose. And now Alex would do whatever it took to save Storm. Every algorithm, every line of code, every ounce of wealth and power she had built. Nothing was off limits. The rain began to fall harder. And in the distance, across the glimmering city, a lone figure with a duffel bag moved under a flickering streetlight. Storm Stone. The search had just begun. Chapter 9. The Anatomy of a Promise. 5 months ago, the air in the penthouse had been thick with hope. Alex had been sitting at her desk, the city glowing behind her, while Storm sat on the floor nearby, reading a medical journal. Alex had just hired a private intelligence firm, the best in the world, to dig into the St. Jude's misappropriation case. "I'm going to find him, Storm," Alex had said, her voice filled with the conviction of a woman who had never lost a battle. "Marcus, the CFO. I'm going to find where he hid the rest of the money, and I'm going to burn his world down. I promise you, by the end of the year, you'll be back in a surgical suite." Storm had looked up, her expression a mix of longing and fear. "Why are you doing this, Alex?" "It's a lot of risk for a woman who values her reputation." Alex had walked over, kneeling on the floor to meet Storm's level. She took Storm's hands, the hands that saved Rose, and kissed the scarred knuckles. "Because you saved my heart," Alex whispered. "And I cannot live in a world where the woman I love is treated like a criminal while the real thieves sit in boardrooms. I will clear your name. I will make sure the world knows Storm Stone is a hero." They had stayed there for hours, planning a future where they didn't have to hide. Alex had felt invincible. She had felt like a queen protecting her most precious treasure. Storm took a slow breath. She lowered her cup and stepped closer. "Alex, you have power in ways I've never seen. But I've learned that power can't fix everything." Alex's heart thumped. "I know. But maybe, together, we can fix what matters." Storm studied her for a long moment, then placed a hand gently on Alex's. "A promise," she said. "Not just words. A promise that if we face anything, we do it together. For Rose. For us. No matter what the world says." Alex nodded, tears prickling at her eyes. "A promise," she whispered. Storm's other hand reached to brush a stray strand of hair from Alex's face. "And if the world tries to take this from us?" she asked softly. Alex took her hand in both of hers. "Then we hold tighter." The city lights flickered, the hum of traffic rising and falling like a heartbeat. Alex felt the warmth of Storm's hand, the quiet strength behind her touch. It was more than comfort. It was a tether to something unbreakable. They leaned into each other, foreheads touching briefly, sharing a silence that spoke louder than words. From the nursery, a small voice floated through the penthouse. "Mom?" "Stormy?" Rose had crawled into the doorway, clutching her stuffed fox, eyes wide with wonder. Storm knelt to her level, wrapping the girl in a soft hug. "Hello, little astronaut," she said. "We were just making a promise. Want to help us keep it?" Rose's giggle was a tiny explosion of light. "I'll help," she whispered. Alex watched them, chest swelling with an ache that was both tender and sharp. In that moment, she realized the true wealth of her life was not in numbers, stock certificates, or power. It was in this. Storm's unusual methods, her ability to speak to hearts before charts, had become the invisible scaffolding holding their little family together. And tonight, that scaffolding was made of promises, whispered vows, and the quiet certainty that some bonds were beyond the reach of any world's rules. Storm turned to Alex once more. "We protect each other," she said, voice low, almost sacred. Alex nodded. "Always." And so, on that night, with the stars outside and Rose asleep in her tiny bed, A promise was made. A promise that would echo through heartbreak, exile, and finally, love remade. But 3 months later, when the board of directors started sniffing around, the invincible CEO had flinched. She had seen the projected losses. She had seen the headlines, Voss CEO embroiled in medical scandal. And slowly, she had stopped returning the calls from the private investigators. She had let the file on Marcus grow dusty. She had chosen the safety of the stone facade over the vulnerability of the truth. The promise hadn't just been broken, it had been abandoned. Chapter 10. The Crash. The phone knock came at 3 a.m., shattering the fragile peace of Alex's office. "Ms. Voss, it's Rose." Dr. Eris's voice was stripped of its usual condescension. It sounded brittle. "Her levels have plummeted. The Swiss protocol, it's not working. Her body is in a state of hyperinflammatory shock. We're prepping for intubation, but her heart is struggling." Alex didn't wait to hear the rest. She was out the door, her car tires screaming against the pavement as she raced back to the penthouse. The scene inside was chaos. Monitors were wailing a high-pitched, rhythmic scream that signaled the end. Rose was a terrifying shade of blue-gray, her small chest heaving in a desperate, failed attempt to pull in air. The world-class doctors were standing around the bed, their faces pale, their tablets discarded. "Do something," Alex shrieked, grabbing Dr. Eris by the lapels of his white coat. "Save her." "We've tried every systemic suppressant in the book," he stammered. "Her pathology is unique. It's not responding to the metrics." Alex looked at her daughter, her brave, star-loving Rose, and she knew. She knew that the only person who could translate this pain was miles away in a basement clinic, probably stitching up a wound by candlelight. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Rose's hand, waiting for the only woman who could remake the love they had destroyed. Alex swallowed hard. "Rose, hold on," she whispered, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Storm will know what to do. Storm will save you." The doctors hovered, sterile and precise. "We need to sedate her for an MRI," one said. "It's protocol." Alex shook her head, voice trembling. "No, you don't understand. She's not just a patient. She's my daughter. Stormwood." Her words faltered, swallowed by helplessness. In that moment, Alex realized something she had never admitted to herself. She could not save Rose on her own. Money, power, status, all useless against the truth Storm had carried quietly in her hands. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. And then Alex made a choice. She didn't call the board. She didn't check the news. She took her phone and dialed the one number she had memorized but hadn't dared to call, hoping that it was switched on this time. "Storm," Alex sobbed when the line picked up. "She's crashing. The doctors, they don't know what to do. They're letting her die, Storm." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end. Alex could hear the distant sound of a siren near the clinic. "I'm not coming for you, Alexandria," Storm's voice came through, jagged and hard. "I'm coming for the little bird. Have the elevators open. And get those men out of my sight. If I see a single board member, I walk." "Anything," Alex gasped. "Just save her." Alex hung up and turned to the room of stunned doctors. "Out," she commanded, her voice the cold, sharp edge of a CEO who finally remembered what she was fighting for. "Every one of you, get out of this room." She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Rose's hand, waiting for the only woman who could remake the love they had destroyed. Alex swallowed hard. "Rose, hold on," she whispered, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Chapter 11. The Arrival of the Storm. The private elevator chime was a silver blade cutting through the panicked murmurs of the penthouse. The Swiss team was filing out, a somber procession of defeated ego. Dr. Eris led the pack, his shoulders hunched, clutching a digital tablet that displayed a flatlining hope. They were men of protocols and peer-reviewed journals, and they were retreating because Rose's heart refused to follow the rules of their textbooks. The doors slid open, and Storm Stone stepped out. She was a jarring contrast to the $5,000 an hour decor. She was wearing the same frayed denim jacket, her boots stained with the dust of the District 6 clinic, and a medical bag, an old, cracked leather thing, slung over her shoulder. Her hair was windblown, and her eyes were hard, gray flint. Dr. Eris stopped, his brow furrowing as he looked at the drifter, blocking his path. "Excuse me, we are in the middle of a terminal medical crisis. You shouldn't be here." Storm didn't slow down. She didn't even look at his face. She planted a hand on Eris's chest and shoved him aside with the casual strength of someone who had moved mountains of bureaucratic red tape. "You're in the middle of a failure," Storm's voice rang out, cold and resonant. "You spent 3 days treating a chart. I'm here to treat the child." "This is highly irregular," another doctor stammered, clutching his briefcase. "She needs intubation. The pulmonary edema is—" Storm stopped then. She turned her head, a predator spotting a weak link. "If you had intubated her 3 hours ago when the vascular pressure peaked, you might have had a chance. Now, you'd just be blowing air into a collapsed lung. Get out of my way before I make your incompetence a matter of public record." The doctors recoiled as if she had struck them. They looked to Alexandria, expecting the CEO to intervene, to restore the order of the Voss legacy. Alexandria stood by the door to Rose's room, her face pale, her eyes fixed solely on Storm. "Let her through," Alex commanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "And if any of you says another word, I'll ensure you never practice on this continent again." The Swiss team vanished into the elevator like ghosts. Storm didn't wait for a thank you. She didn't even acknowledge Alex as she sprinted past. She burst into Rose's room, the scent of peppermint and street rain suddenly overwhelming the smell of bleach and failure. Rose was motionless, her skin the color of wet ash. The monitors were emitting a long, continuous drone, the sound of a heart giving up. "I've got you, little bird," Storm whispered, her voice fracturing for the first time. She didn't look at the high-tech monitors. She dropped her bag on the silk duvet, her hands moving with that hypnotic, surgical grace. She ripped the expensive sensors off Rose's chest, discarding them like trash. She pressed her ear directly to Rose's heart, her eyes closing as she searched for the rhythm that the machines had lost. "Alex, get me the epinephrine from the side pocket of my bag," Storm barked, not looking back. And Emmanuel bellows. "No." For the first time in her life, Alexandria Voss wasn't the one giving orders. She was the assistant to a woman the world called a nobody. She scrambled for the bag, her hands shaking as she watched Storm Stone begin the agonizing, beautiful work of pulling a soul back from the edge. The language of silence was gone. Now there was only the sound of Storm's breath against Rose's cheek and the desperate, rhythmic thud of a mother's heart hoping for a miracle. Minutes stretched. Rose's shallow breathing steadied under Storm's hands. The monitors no longer screamed warnings, they ticked in rhythm with Storm's intuition, not sterile procedure. Hours passed. Rose's breathing returned to a steady rhythm. Her tiny hand curled around Storm's finger. "Stormy," she murmured. Alex exhaled slowly, feeling the weight she had carried for days finally lift. Every second of searching, every algorithm, every rule she had broken, it had all led here. Storm glanced at Alex, just for a moment, a spark of something unspoken passing between them. A promise remembered, a debt repaid, a love rekindled. "Stay," Alex whispered, almost a plea. Storm smiled faintly, brushing a damp strand of hair from Rose's forehead. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. And in that cold, sterile penthouse, the world outside, the boardroom, the chaos, the rules, ceased to exist. Only the quiet, unwavering bond of 3 hearts remained. Rose stirred, eyes half open, and reached for Storm. "Stormy," she said again. Storm bent down, pressing her forehead to Rose's. "Always, little bird," she whispered. Alex's chest ached with something that was equal parts relief, awe, and longing. The storm had arrived. And now, together, they could face the world. Chapter 12. The Resurrection. The monitors beeped in harsh, sterile noise, a mechanical flatline that seemed cruelly detached from the fragile life it measured. Rose was crashing. The room was no longer a bedroom, it was a battlefield. Storm didn't use the sleek, digital infusion pumps. She had Alex hold the 4 bag, squeezing it manually to a rhythm only Storm could hear. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the sharp, metallic tang of blood. "She's slipping, Storm," Alex choked out, her arms aching from the tension. The monitor's flatline was a haunting, endless hum that seemed to vibrate in Alex's very teeth. "Don't look at the screen, Alex. Look at her," Storm shouted. She was over Rose, her hands locked in the rhythmic, brutal dance of CPR. Thud, thud, thud. "Talk to her. Tell her about the stars. Tell her she's not allowed to leave the ship yet." Alex leaned down, her tears falling onto Rose's pale forehead. "Rosie. Rose, baby. Stormy is here. We're going to the gardens, remember? The echinacea is blooming. You have to see the green, Rosie. Please, stay for the green." Storm reached into her bag and pulled out a long, glass vial, something she had compounded herself in the back of the District 6 clinic. She didn't check the label, she knew the amber hue by heart. She injected it directly into the line, her eyes fixed on the pulse point at Rose's neck. Seconds stretched into infinities. The silence in the room was a physical weight, pressing against Alex's lungs until she thought they might burst. Then, a flicker. A small, ragged gasp escaped Rose's lips, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. The monitor chirped. A spike. Then another. The erratic, beautiful rhythm of a heart deciding to fight back. Storm didn't stop. She adjusted the oxygen, her hands moving like a weaver's, stabilizing the tide. It took another hour of agonizing focus, but eventually, the blue tint faded from Rose's fingernails, replaced by a ghost of pink. Storm finally sat back, her denim jacket soaked in sweat, her face ashen. She didn't look at Alex. She just rested her hand on Rose's small chest, feeling the rise and fall. "She's back," Storm whispered, her voice cracking. "She's back." Alex collapsed into the chair opposite her, the adrenaline leaving her body in a terrifying rush. She looked at Storm, exhausted, disgraced, and brilliant, and realized that all the gold in the Voss vaults couldn't have bought the last 60 minutes. Storm leaned closer, whispering to Rose, her voice soft but steady. "Little astronaut, we're almost through the turbulence. Hold on for me." Alex felt something break inside her, a combination of awe, fear, and gratitude. She had wealth, influence, and every resource at her fingertips, yet none of it mattered here. Only Storm. Only her knowledge, her presence, her fierce insistence that Rose survive. Rose stirred again, tiny hands curling around Storm's finger. "Stormy," she murmured. In that room, amid the beeping monitors and the sterile lights, love had resurrected life itself. Alex reached out, lightly brushing Storm's arm, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to feel the quiet, unwavering hope that had been building beneath every heartbreak, every missed moment, every whispered "Stormy." Because sometimes, the heart had to break before it could remember how to soar. Chapter 13. The Vigil. For the next 48 hours, the penthouse became a sanctuary of shadows. Storm refused to sleep in a guest room. She dragged a velvet armchair to the side of Rose's bed and stayed there, a silent sentry. She monitored every breath, every twitch of Rose's eyelids. Alexandria found herself in an unfamiliar role, the provider of comfort. She brought Storm lukewarm tea and sandwiches she had made herself, her hands clumsy with the unfamiliar task. She watched Storm from the doorway, seeing the way the woman's shoulders slumped in sleep for 10 minutes at a time before she bolted upright to check the 4. At 4 a.m. on the second night, the silence was broken by a soft voice. "Why didn't you fight for me, Alex?" Storm didn't turn around. She was looking out the window at the skyline, the lights reflecting in her tired gray eyes. Alex stopped in the middle of the room, a tray of water in her hands. The question was a physical blow. "I was afraid," Alex admitted, her voice a fragile whisper. "I've spent my whole life building a fortress of numbers and reputation because I thought it would make Rose safe. I thought if I lost the company, I'd lose the ability to protect her." "You protected the money," Storm said, her voice devoid of anger, which made it hurt more. "But you left the person. You let them call me a thief because it was cleaner for your board." "I know." Alex set the tray down and walked to the window, standing a respectful distance away. "And I have spent every second since you walked out realizing that a fortress is just a cage if you're the only one inside. I'm making it right, Storm. Not just for Rose. For you." Storm finally looked at her. Her face was a map of exhaustion. "You can't make trust, Alex. You can only earn it. And right now, the balance is at 0. The hours stretched long into the night. The city outside was alive, indifferent, a maze of light and sound. Inside this small hospital room, time slowed, each heartbeat magnified, each whisper weighted with meaning. Alex watched as Storm dozed lightly, one hand still resting on Rose's small hand, the other holding the 4 line like it was a lifeline tethering them all together. She felt something shift inside her, a surrender not of weakness, but of trust. Of love. By the first hints of dawn, Rose stirred more fully, eyes opening to see Storm's calm presence, Alex's trembling hand nearby. A tiny smile tugged at her lips. "Stormy?" Storm leaned closer, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, little astronaut," she whispered. "We made it." Alex exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the night lift, replaced with quiet reverence for the woman who had carried them through the storm. And in that room, amidst monitors and 4 lines, whispers and soft breaths, Alex understood something she would never forget. Love is not always a blaze. Sometimes it is a vigil, a steady, unwavering presence that holds life together. She pressed her forehead lightly against Storm's shoulder, murmuring, "Always, Storm. Always." Storm responded not with words, but with a gentle squeeze, an anchor in the night, a silent promise that the storms could come and go, but their bond would endure. Chapter 14. The Exposure. 2 months later, Alex's penthouse office felt colder than usual, the city skyline gleaming like a silent jury outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had sat in that chair for hours, laptop open, documents spread across her mahogany desk like evidence in a trial she was determined to win. Every file, every transaction, every email pointed to the same truth: Marcus Hale, the CFO, had orchestrated the embezzlement, and Storm had been made the scapegoat. Alex's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could release the evidence, publicly dismantle the corruption, exonerate Storm, and risk the wrath of her board, the investors, the media. Her heart ached at the thought of Storm's unjust exile, of her brilliance hidden behind lies. She thought of the night Storm had spent beside Rose, the vigils, the whispered reassurances, the way the little girl's tiny hands had clung to her. The name Stormy echoed in Alex's mind. That nickname, that bond, it deserved justice. She exhaled slowly and began the broadcast, live across every major news network. "Good evening. My name is Alexandria Voss, CEO of Voss Capital. Tonight, I am revealing the truth about events that have affected the life and career of Dr. Stormstone." Alex's voice trembled only slightly. She shared the documentation, the timestamps, the proof of embezzlement. She outlined Storm's impeccable record, her dedication to patients, and the board's failure to recognize her brilliance. By the time she finished, silence hung in the room like a held breath. Outside, the world was already reacting. News channels replayed the documents, analysts debated, social media erupted with support for Storm. Alex slumped back in her chair, chest tight. She had expected resistance, pushback, scandal, but instead, she saw the truth emerge unstoppable. Her phone buzzed. A single message from Storm, watching. "Thank you." Alex's throat tightened. That simple message, stripped of ceremony, carried all the gratitude, relief, and love in the world. She closed her eyes, imagining Storm's gray eyes, the fierce calm, the quiet strength that had saved her daughter and held their little family together. The next morning, the boardroom was a battlefield of whispered panic. Marcus Hale had been suspended pending investigation. Investors called, journalists requested interviews, and the world knew the truth. Alex knew she had risked everything, her reputation, her position, even her comfort in the corporate world. But it was worth it. Worth every sleepless night, every frantic search, every heartbeat spent wondering if Storm was safe. That evening, Alex returned home. Rose ran into her arms, tiny and joyous, and Alex felt the weight of the past months lift just enough to breathe. Storm was already there, leaning casually against the kitchen doorway, a small smile playing on her lips, wet hair from the rain that always seemed to follow her arrival. "You did it," Storm said softly. Alex shook her head. "We did it. Together." Storm's eyes softened. "I know. But the world, it sees it now too." Alex stepped closer, hands lightly brushing Storm's damp hair from her face. "And they'll never forget you again." Storm's lips curved in a quiet, private smile. "Then I guess some storms are worth weathering." Alex's chest ached with relief, pride, and something deeper, a love that had endured separation, fear, and heartbreak, now shining resilient and unbroken. Outside, the city lights twinkled, oblivious to the quiet revolution of justice and devotion that had unfolded within a penthouse, a hospital, and the hearts of 3 intertwined lives. Inside, Alex knew one thing: Storm would never walk away again. And for the first time in months, Alex allowed herself to dream of a future where love and justice coexisted, where promises were not just whispered but honored, and where the woman who had saved her daughter could finally reclaim her life and her heart. Chapter 15. The Aftermath of the Fire. The morning sunlight filtered through the penthouse windows, warm and golden, painting the room in soft hues of hope. Rose lay propped up in her favorite chair, small blankets tucked around her, eyes bright and curious. She smiled up at Storm, who knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from the child's forehead. "Stormy," Rose whispered, voice full of the innocent wonder only 8 years old could carry. Storm's gray eyes softened, the storm within them quieted for a moment. "Hello, little astronaut," she murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Rose's head. Alex watched from the doorway, heart swelling with a tide of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, a longing that had never dimmed, only been tempered by distance and fear. Storm rose slowly, turning to face Alex. The room seemed to hold its breath. Their eyes met, words unnecessary, yet every emotion crystal clear: apology, gratitude, fear, hope, and a love that refused to be broken. Alex stepped forward, hands trembling slightly. I should have never let you leave," she whispered. Storm's lips curved in a small, private smile. "You didn't know," she said softly. "Now you do. And now we fix it." Alex reached out, her fingers lightly brushing Storm's hand. I want to fix us. If you'll let me." Storm's storm-gray eyes softened, shadows of past hurt mingling with the warmth of this present moment. She lifted Alex's hand to her lips, pressing a feather-light kiss to the back of her palm. "We'll take it slow," she said. "Step by step. But yes, we can rebuild." Rose clapped her tiny hands, delighted. "Stormy and Alex," she exclaimed, her voice ringing like a bell. "Together." Alex knelt beside her daughter, brushing hair from her forehead. "Together," she echoed, voice thick with emotion. Storm moved closer, wrapping an arm around Alex's waist, holding her gently yet firmly, a promise embedded in that touch. Alex felt her chest loosen, years of tension and fear melting away. They stood there for a long moment, three hearts bound by trust, survival, and unwavering love. Outside, the city moved obliviously, but inside the penthouse, time had slowed, suspended in a quiet, golden bubble of reconciliation. Alex bent, pressing a soft kiss to Storm's lips, a kiss that spoke of apologies, of gratitude, of unspoken vows. Storm responded, letting herself lean into the warmth she had longed for, the storm finally finding its calm. Rose giggled, the sound pure and joyous, and reached up to grab both of their hands. "Never leave us again," she demanded softly. Storm chuckled, brushing Rose's cheek. "Never," she promised. Alex's eyes met Storm's again, and in that gaze, they both understood. Love had been tested, fractured, and tempered, but it had survived. And in the soft light of that morning, amidst blankets and whispered laughter, hearts beat in unison, a quiet symphony of healing, resilience, and hope. The storm had passed. The love that remained was stronger, deeper, and unshakable. Chapter 16. The Scent of Echinacea. Sunlight poured through the wide windows of the small cottage, painting everything in honeygold. Rose ran barefoot across the wooden floors, laughter spilling like sunlight itself, chasing a stray cat that had wandered through the garden gate. "Stormy, catch me," she called, tiny arms outstretched, hair bouncing with every step. Stormstone leaned against the doorway, damp mop in hand from tending the small kitchen floor, her gray eyes soft as they followed Rose. "Careful, little astronaut," she murmured, voice playful yet firm. "Gravity's still working against you." Alex stood beside Storm, inhaling the faint herbal scent of the cottage, the mingling aromas of fresh bread, eucalyptus, and the delicate tang of echinacea from the small potted plant Storm had placed by the windowsill. She reached out, brushing a stray curl from Storm's forehead. "You made this place perfect," she said softly. Storm's lips curved in a quiet smile. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's ours. And it's healing. Every corner holds a little piece of peace for us." Alex let herself linger in that peace. The chaos of boards, hospital corridors, and the cruel weight of corporate politics had been replaced by sunlight and laughter. By small hands curling around theirs, by quiet evenings spent tending gardens, reading stories, and sharing silences that didn't need filling. Rose ran back to them, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered from the garden. "For you, Stormy," she exclaimed, pressing them into Storm's hands. Storm knelt, eyes meeting Alex's briefly, and then pressed the flowers to Rose's small nose. "Thank you, little one. These are perfect," she said. Then she leaned down, brushing her lips to Rose's forehead. "You're my bravest astronaut, you know that?" Alex's heart tightened with joy and relief. She realized, fully, that love wasn't just about grand gestures or life-or-death battles. It was in these tiny, sacred moments, in the scent of herbs in the morning, in laughter shared across sun-drenched floors, in the quiet acknowledgement that they had survived and grown stronger together. Storm stood, brushing hands on her jeans, and reached for Alex. Their fingers intertwined effortlessly, a soft grounding against the freedom and movement of the morning. "We've come a long way," she said softly. "We have," Alex agreed. She felt the warmth of Storm's hand, the soft weight of Rose leaning against her leg, and something inside her finally relaxed, knowing that these small, steady breaths, the scent of healing herbs, the laughter of a child, was the life they had fought for. Outside, birds flitted among the trees, and the gentle wind carried the sweet, lingering scent of echinacea through the open windows. Inside, the three of them moved together in a quiet rhythm, feeding, laughing, reading, tending, living. And in that rhythm, Alex knew the truth she had been chasing all along. Love was not just a storm to survive, but a home to inhabit, where hearts could mend and souls could breathe freely. Rose tugged at Storm's hand. "Let's go to the stars tonight," she whispered. Storm smiled, glancing at Alex. "Then we'll go, little astronaut. Together." Alex leaned down to press her forehead against Storm's shoulder. "Together," she whispered, letting the morning light wash over them. In that small, sunlit cottage, life, love, and trust were reborn, carrying the scent of healing herbs and the promise of a future written together. Chapter 17. The Trial of Stone. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, ink, and anxiety. The kind of anxiety that clung to the air like a heavy curtain, pressing on everyone present. Storm Stone stood at the defendant's table, though not guilty in the slightest sense, her gray eyes sharp, her posture a careful balance of confidence and restraint. Across the room, the opposing attorneys were already arranging their papers, their faces masks of calculated disdain. Alex sat in the gallery, knees pressed together, hands clenched lightly around a small water bottle. Her stone facade, perfected over decades of boardroom battles, held, just barely, but her eyes never left Storm. Storm inhaled, glancing at Alex briefly, a small, private spark of reassurance passing between them. She turned her attention to the judge, her voice steady, precise, carrying both authority and undeniable sincerity. For 3 hours, Storm dismantled the lie. She spoke with clinical precision about the diverted funds, the forged signatures, and the deliberate neglect of the pediatric ward. She didn't lead with emotion. She led with the facts she had memorized while living on the streets, the dates, the amounts, the names of the children who had suffered because of Marcus's greed. "And why?" the defense attorney asked, his voice dripping with feigned skepticism. "Did you wait so long to bring this evidence forward? Why live as a drifter if you were innocent?" Storm leaned into the microphone. "Because the world you built, counselor, doesn't listen to drifters. It only listens to people with titles and bank accounts. I waited because I was waiting for someone to see the doctor before they saw the denim jacket." She glanced at Alex. "I waited until I found someone brave enough to value the truth over the stock price." When she stepped down, the room was silent. Marcus wouldn't look at her. The angel of St. Catherine's hadn't just returned. She had brought the fire with her. Finally, the judge spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, the court finds Dr. Storm Stone not guilty of all charges. Furthermore, the actions of the accused CFO, Marcus Hale, will be investigated separately, with his professional standing under review." A soft exhale escaped Alex's lips. Relief, yes, but also pride. And longing. She wanted to rush forward, wrap Storm in her arms, tell her everything she had felt, everything she had feared losing. Storm remained poised, though a single hand brushed lightly against Alex's in the gallery, a silent connection that said more than words ever could. When the court adjourned, Alex and Storm found themselves alone in the hallway, the echoes of the trial fading into the polished marble silence. Storm turned, her storm-gray eyes softened by exhaustion and triumph. "You did it," Alex whispered, pressing a hand against Storm's cheek. "You faced it all, and you came through." Storm shook her head, a small smile touching her lips. "We did it. You stood there. You never wavered. That made all the difference." Alex leaned in, brushing lips against Storm's temple, savoring the warmth and solidity of her presence. "Always," she murmured. "Through every storm, always." Storm's hand found Alex's, fingers intertwining, grounding each other in the quiet triumph of justice reclaimed. Rose's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, a reminder of why they had fought, why they had persevered. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to victories and trials. But inside that small space, amidst the echoes of history and whispered promises, Alex and Storm understood fully. The storm had passed, but love, true love, had endured, unbroken, remade, and stronger than ever. Chapter 18. The Blueprints. 6 weeks after the trial, the Stonevoss Clinic was still a skeleton of brick and dust, but to Alex, it was more beautiful than any skyscraper she had ever commissioned. The building was an old textile warehouse in a neighborhood that sat exactly on the border between the wealthy suburbs and the struggling townships. It was a place of transition. Alex stood in the center of the main floor, a hard hat over her hair, holding a set of blueprints. She wasn't looking at profit margins, she was looking at the placement of the windows. "The light needs to hit the recovery ward at sunset," she told the foreman. "Rose says the orange light makes the medicine taste better." Storm walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee from a nearby street vendor. She looked at the exposed brick and the soaring ceilings. "It's perfect, Alex. It doesn't look like a hospital. It looks like a place where you can breathe." Alex took her coffee, her fingers lingering against Storm's. "I've been looking at the budget. If we strip back the executive offices, we can afford a full-time nutritionist and a mobile unit for the outlying areas." Storm smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. A nobody and a disgraced CEO building a clinic. The board would have a heart attack. "Let them," Alex said, leaning her head against Storm's shoulder. "I used to build things to show off. Now I want to build things that stay. I want Rose to grow up knowing that her mother finally learned how to invest in things that actually matter." The sensory details of the construction, the smell of fresh sawdust, the clink of hammers, the grit of the dust, felt like the love remade in physical form. They were building a foundation that couldn't be shaken by a board meeting or a headline. Alex paused at a small, sunlit corner near the back. "This will be your office," she said softly. "Desk by the window, plants on the sill. I'll bring you the echinacea you love." Storm turned, gray eyes softening. "You've been paying attention," she said quietly. "I like that." Alex stepped closer, brushing a hand over Storm's arm. "I always do," she whispered. Their fingers brushed and lingered, hands communicating more than words could. Storm's voice lowered, a private murmur between them. "You know, this isn't just a clinic. It's us. A place where mistakes are forgiven, where life is saved, where we," she trailed off, letting her gaze sweep the empty building, imagining its heartbeat once it was alive with care. Alex's hand found hers, squeezing lightly. "Where we build together," she finished. They spent the next hours walking room by room, blueprint in hand, occasionally stopping to share small touches, soft laughter, quiet reassurances. Outside, the city rumbled and pulsed, oblivious to the intimate world forming inside the bones of this forgotten building. Storm traced the outline of a future waiting to be filled. "This room will be the treatment area for the rare cases. The ones I struggled with before," she said, eyes alight with purpose. "And we'll train others, Alex. Teach them what I've learned, what Rose taught me about patience, imagination, and love." Alex nodded, heartful. "And we'll make it a place where no child is overlooked, no parent feels helpless, and no doctor is ever punished for doing what's right." Storm glanced at her, voice soft, tinged with vulnerability. "You always think big, Alex. I'm lucky to have someone who believes in what I see." Alex leaned closer, lips brushing her temple. "I don't just believe. I know. And I'll keep proving it every day. They walked to the back of the building, surveying the small courtyard. The wind carried the faint scent of herbs, dust, and promise. Rose would run through this space someday, laughter echoing off the freshly painted walls, her tiny hands guiding the future alongside theirs. Storm pressed her hand to Alex's chest, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath. "We've come a long way," she whispered. Alex rested her forehead against Storm's, letting the quiet of the empty building fill them. "And we're just getting started." Chapter 19. The First Patient. The morning sun spilled into the freshly painted clinic, warm light dancing across the walls adorned with soft murals of stars, planets, and tiny children holding hands. Stormstone stood in the treatment room, adjusting instruments and checking charts. Every movement was precise, calm, and deliberate, yet beneath the professionalism was an undeniable warmth, a presence that reassured the children and parents alike. Alex arrived shortly after, carrying coffee in a tray, the faint scent of roasted beans mingling with the herbs lining the windowsills. She set the cups down, brushing a strand of hair from Storm's face. "First day," she whispered. "Feeling ready?" Storm's gray eyes softened, the tension of anticipation mingling with purpose. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. "This isn't just about medicine, Alex. It's about trust. And today, we begin earning it again." The doorbell chimed, announcing their very first patient. Rose had insisted on being there, her tiny hands clutching a small stuffed star. She whispered excitedly to Storm, "It's like taking someone on our spaceship, Stormy. Show them the stars." A mother entered, holding a pale little girl who looked scared and fragile. "Dr. Stone," the mother asked, voice trembling. I heard about you. About what you did for Rose. I'm hoping maybe you can help my daughter too." Storm knelt, eyes level with the child. "Hello, I'm Storm," she said softly. "You're very brave. Can you show me your hands?" The child extended them hesitantly. Storm's gentle touch, her soft words, and the patient way she guided the girl immediately created a bridge of trust. Alex watched, heart swelling, noticing how the other parents in the waiting room began to relax, sensing the calm authority Storm radiated. "See this?" Storm whispered to the girl, gesturing to the 4-line. "This is our rocket fluid. It'll take you to the stars while we help your body get stronger." The child's eyes widened, a small smile tugging at her lips. Alex felt a lump in her throat, the same magic she had seen with Rose, Storm turning medical necessity into something imaginative, nurturing, and deeply human. Alex moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on Storm's shoulder. "You've always understood things differently," she whispered. "And now, the world sees it too." Storm glanced at her, a small, private smile curling her lips. "And I had you to remind me," she murmured. The morning passed in a rhythm of small victories, children laughing through treatments, parents relieved and hopeful, and Rose proudly showing everyone how to pilot the rocket. Each success, no matter how minor, cemented the legacy of their love and dedication. By late afternoon, Storm and Alex stood in the now bustling waiting room, watching the sun cast golden streaks across the floors. Storm's hand found Alex's, their fingers intertwining. "Look at this," Storm said softly. "All of it, alive." Alex nodded, heartful. "It's more than a clinic. It's a promise kept. A life rebuilt." Storm leaned in, brushing her lips lightly against Alex's temple. "We did it. Together." And outside, beyond the doors of the Stonevos Clinic, the city moved on. But inside, healing, love, and hope were tangible, breathing, and endless, carried in laughter, gentle hands, and whispered words that stitched hearts together. Rose ran past, clutching a tiny chart like a mission log. "Mission accomplished," she shouted gleefully. Storm laughed, Alex smiled, and the three of them stood, watching a new future unfold one child at a time, one heartbeat at a time, one love remade at a time. Chapter 20. The Language of Home. The cottage was quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, it was full of the gentle rhythms of a life rebuilt. Rose sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, sketching constellations with colored pencils, her little spaceship hovering in every corner of the page. "Stormy," she called softly, "look. We're going to the stars again." Stormstone smiled, kneeling beside her, gray eyes warm. "I see it, little astronaut," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Rose's forehead. "And this time, we'll go together. Always." Alex watched them from the doorway, heartful. She crossed the room and leaned against the frame, simply observing the laughter, the trust, the quiet magic that had blossomed from pain and perseverance. "You know," she said softly, stepping closer, this is home." Storm turned, lips curving in a soft, private smile. "Home," she echoed, voice low and intimate. "It's where we're together, isn't it?" Alex reached out, hands brushing against Storm's. "It is," she whispered, "in every moment, every laugh, every shared breath." Storm leaned in, pressing her forehead to Alex's. "I never thought we'd get here," she murmured. "After everything, the betrayal, the loss, the storm, we did." Alex kissed her gently, a slow, lingering brush of lips that spoke of forgiveness, trust, and enduring love. "We did," she agreed. "And we'll keep doing it. Every day, every night, for as long as we get to." Rose looked up, a small grin tugging at her lips. "You two are my universe," she said, voice full of wonder. Storm chuckled, pressing a kiss to Rose's temple. "And you're ours, little one. Always ours." The three of them stood together, hands intertwined, hearts beating in a quiet symphony of belonging. The cottage was filled with the scent of herbs, sun-warmed wood, and the faint trace of rocket fuel from imagination's voyage. Alex glanced out the open windows, watching the trees sway gently in the afternoon breeze. "We've built something stronger than walls or wealth," she said softly. "We've built trust, family, love, a language that only we speak." Storm pressed a hand to Alex's cheek, eyes gleaming with emotion. "A language that heals," she murmured. "That protects. That stays, even when the world turns against us." Alex leaned into the touch, heart quiet and full. "And it always will," she whispered. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the battles fought and won, the storms weathered, and the love forged in fire and tenderness. Inside, however, life flowed gently, laughter echoed, and the bonds between them were unbreakable. Storm looked down at Rose, then up at Alex, and whispered, This is the life I've been waiting for." Alex smiled, brushing her lips against Storm's. "And we'll keep waiting together, always," she said. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the cottage. Rose yawned, curling up in the middle of a cozy blanket. Storm and Alex stood beside her, hands entwined, hearts full, knowing that every hardship, every storm, had led them here, to love remade, life reclaimed, and home found in each other. In the quiet, golden light, they understood fully. This was the language of home, spoken in laughter, whispered in trust, and written in the unbreakable bond between hearts. Chapter 21. Love Remade. The sun rose over the small cottage, spilling golden light across the garden where echinacea, lavender, and wildflowers grew in cheerful chaos. Rose chased a butterfly along the path, tiny laughter ringing like wind chimes in the morning air. She paused, looking up at Storm and Alex, and waved a hand with the confidence of a little captain navigating her ship. "Come on. The stars are waiting," she shouted, and without hesitation, they followed, Storm's hand in Alex's, their fingers intertwined, hearts beating together in quiet harmony. Inside the Stoneboss Clinic, doors opened to a new day of children, parents, and hope. Storm's gray eyes sparkled with purpose, Alex's with steadfast love. Together, they had transformed a derelict building into a sanctuary, a place where science and intuition danced hand in hand, where children like Rose could thrive and parents could breathe again. Alex leaned against Storm in the quiet moment before the first patient arrived, brushing a kiss along her temple. "Look at what we've built," she whispered. Storm smiled softly, pressing her forehead to Alex's. "It's more than walls, Alex. It's a legacy. It's love in action. It's us." Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers, a reminder that life, like the gardens they nurtured, thrived best when tended with care, patience, and devotion. Rose returned, holding a small notebook full of star maps. "Look, Stormy. I charted all the new planets for the clinic." Storm laughed, ruffling Rose's hair. "You're the bravest astronaut I know," she said. Then, with a glance at Alex, added softly, "And this whole journey wouldn't have been possible without you." Alex caught her hand, entwining fingers once more. "We did it together," she said, voice full of emotion. "Through every storm, every heartbreak, together." The sun climbed higher, illuminating the deck outside their cottage. Storm and Alex stood side by side, watching Rose explore the garden, imagining worlds beyond the skies, full of endless possibilities. "Do you remember?" Alex murmured. "The first day we met, the chaos, the fear, the impossibility of it all?" Storm's lips curved in a tender smile. "I do. And now, look at us." She took Alex's face in her hands, a gentle promise. "Love remade. Lives remade. Family remade. And we'll keep remaking it every day for as long as we live." Alex pressed her lips to Storm's, slow, intimate, grounding, the kiss of survival, of devotion, of an unshakable bond that had been tested and tempered by fire and still burned brighter than ever. Rose's laughter floated to them, the sound of life, of hope, of all the little victories stitched together. And in that golden morning light, Alex, Storm, and Rose were not just alive, they were whole. The storm had passed. The love they had forged in its wake was steady, enduring, and unbreakable. And in that quiet, sun-drenched world, amidst wildflowers and whispered promises, their hearts spoke a language older than words, a language of home, of trust, and of love remade. Epilogue. The architecture of breath. The house was finally still. The scent of the echinacea outside was carried in on a cool Atlantic breeze, mingling with the lingering aroma of the lavender tea Alexandria had brewed. In the next room, Rose was deep in the restorative sleep of a healthy child, her breathing a steady, rhythmic reassurance that punctuated the silence. Alexandria stood on the balcony, looking out at the distant, glittering lights. From here, the skyscrapers where she once reigned looked like tiny, insignificant toys. She felt a pair of arms slide around her waist, and the tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying evaporated. Storm pressed her forehead against the space between Alex's shoulder blades. "You're thinking again," she murmured, her voice a low, honeyed rasp. "I can hear the gears turning from across the room." Alex turned in her arms, circling Storm's neck and pulling her close. The cashmere sweater Storm wore was soft, but the woman beneath it was solid, real, and finally, entirely hers. "I was just thinking about how quiet it is. I used to think power was loud. I used to think it was the sound of 1,000 people saying yes to me." She trailed her fingers down the side of Storm's face, tracing the sharp line of her jaw and the faint, tired shadows beneath her gray eyes. "But this is the only power I ever want. The power to keep this quiet." Storm leaned in, her lips brushing Alex's temple. The intimacy between them was no longer a frantic, desperate thing forged in the heat of a crisis. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was the language of silence, perfected. "You saved me, too, you know," Storm whispered against her skin. Everyone talks about how I saved Rose, how I fixed the clinic. But I was dying out there, Alex. Not from a disease, but from being unseen. You gave me back my reflection. Alex pulled back just enough to look into those gray eyes. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just finally cleared the dust off the mirror. Storm's hands moved to Alex's face, her thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The touch was clinical in its precision, but ancient in its tenderness. She leaned in, closing the small gap between them. The kiss was a reconstruction, a promise kept, a debt paid, and a love remade from the ashes of who they used to be. Stay here, Storm breathed against her lips. In the quiet. With me. I'm not going anywhere, Alex promised. They stood there for a long time, held together by nothing more than the air they shared and the life they had fought for. Below them, the gardens bloomed in the dark, and above them, the Southern Cross anchored the sky. The billionaire and the doctor, the mother and the savior, they were none of those things now. They were simply two souls who had found the only home that ever mattered. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.